Hi students, in this video I introduce the approach or the use of the analysis as a way to flesh out the meanings in the readings and as a way to evaluate the robustness of the theories that they are proposing. In this video I introduce or explore issues or units 1 through 7, and in a second video issues 8 through 15. Now, I use the units of analysis because they are the best tool that I know of to evaluate the robustness of the theories. And what do I mean by robustness? I mean that we often will get an extreme theory, extreme social theory or romantic theory of writing that does not allow for all of the rhetorical features of the writing to have a play or have an influence of what is going on. So the most robust theories of writing, especially L2 writing, entail many other rhetorical issues and influence a wide variety of issues. And let me explain how that works. I'm going to start with issue or unit number 1, and this is to me the foundation of rhetoric, and I call it the PRIOS approach. If those who are new to rhetoric want to understand what we mean by rhetoric, I think PRIOS is a great example. PRIOS means purpose, reader, information, organization, and style. I use PRIOS in many ways in my teaching. PRIOS can be a planning tool for writers. In other words, if I am going to write a document in a certain context, I have to decide on the purpose. Once I decide on the purpose, I then look at the reader and my relationship to the reader. When I have decided on the purpose and reader, only then will I know the information. And once I have purpose, reader, and information, I can understand how to organize that information, and all four of the previous categories, purpose, reader, information, organization, will tell me what style is appropriate. Now, we can use that as a planning tool in writing. We can use that as a grading tool in writing. We can use it also to evaluate the L2 writing theories, because students will come from a variety of languages and backgrounds, and they will be used to a different rhetoric than what they will face in the U.S. Standard Academic English Prose. And this doesn't have to mean international students or ELL students. Many of our students aren't familiar with the PRIOS or the rhetoric of academic writing. But in our case, we're looking at English language learners or ESL learners or L2 learners. And so one of the major approaches or units of analysis, does this rhetoric of your assignment or your course fit the English language context? For example, many students coming from cultures that might have more collective rhetorics or more authoritative rhetorics are surprised that the purposes of the writing assignments are so argumentative. I call them agonistic, and that lays a lot of the roles on proving the point on the writer. And in other cultures, if there is a rhetoric of more hierarchical relations, the writer cannot even assume that kind of purpose in the writing assignment. So one of the key theories in evaluating the readings is, does this reading, this theory of ELL writing, allow for, or does it address the needs for students to understand the purpose of the writing? Now, this has two approaches. Number one is we must, what I call, denaturalize the U.S. approach. And that is to say, this is the approach of writing, especially in standard academic English. And this approach assumes an agonistic relationship and an agonistic purpose that you have to prove your point. So that's our first. Second, the reader-writer relation in rhetoric is based on very predominant cultural values that structure the rhetorical traditions. And one of the reader-writer relations that is difficult for many students to understand if they're not familiar with standard academic English is what I called the babied egalitarian reader-writer relationship that's standard in our university system. And that means that you have to treat the reader as someone that needs to be taken through the text carefully, and I call babied or signpost through the text. But you also have to convince the reader of your point, and you are mostly egalitarian in the sense that you don't cave into the reader, assuming the reader has a much more authority, and you just can imply things. You have to take a really strong, agonistic, thesis-driven approach. And that's the reader-writer relations that's set up in most U.S. academic English. Students are going to come to that situation not really understanding that. So you have to, as an ELL instructor, understand the culture that surrounds the writing prompts in the United States and make sure students understand that. And then you help them bridge. And this is where Severino's writing is good. My approach is you explain the reader-writer relationship in the U.S. genre and help them write to that, not mimicking that, but at least address those circumstances. Next is information and creativity. The purpose and the reader will tell you what kinds of information you need to have. For example, if a student is coming from a really collective authoritative culture, that student needs to understand the roles and needs to put in the essay the roles of the readers and the writers and the people involved, and it's a very role-based approach. But if you're coming from a low-context, universal, more individualistic paradigm, such as what tends to happen in the United States, you can be more direct and get to the point and be what we call a little more objective in the sense of you get to the main features that are not as well connected to the roles in writing. So ELL instructors need to understand what kind of information they're asking for from their students in the essays and help these students bridge the information gap. They will most likely, if coming from a collective culture, want to write to the roles and to the authorities with politeness and care, and they want to make sure that they kiss up. And this has something to do with stereotypes and cliches. Readers coming from collective cultures most often like to use cliches or stereotypes to show their connection and involvement. And in more egalitarian or in more individualistic cultures, cliches are shunned for the opposite reasons, that they are a sign of inauthenticity. Going to organization, I don't know if we're going to read Kaplan, but there's all kinds of organizations of discourse and of paragraphs based on cultural values. And the linear aggressive thesis is the typical U.S. approach to organizing text. But students coming from all sorts of other traditions, I want to read about this, organize their writing according to the rhetorical traditions of their culture. And sometimes for us, it feels circular. But for a student writing in his or her particular culture, it's not circular and linear. And so circularity, linearity, and aggressiveness are basically cultural constructs. So you need to understand where the students are coming from in order to help them bridge the organizational gap. Next is style. All of those four previous categories tell you what kind of style is appropriate. And ELL students are going to have difficulty with style. They'll learn typically a formal style in the classroom and a grammatical style in the classroom, but then they'll pick up more Facebook style or more slang style from media and maybe from the relationships, and they're going to have a difficult time often figuring out what stylistic approaches in terms of word choice, a complexity of sentences, how all of that works. And so you need to bridge the gap. And the U.S. style in U.S. academic prose tends to be middle of the road, not overly formal, not overly low, but it has a very agonistic style as well. So that's a PRIOS, and that's a foundation for as 5 important units of analysis. And I've captured them in one term called PRIOS. And it's a complex concept, but that's what rhetoric means, PRIOS. Next, I'm going to rhetorical exigency, and this is classic rhetorical theory. What problem, need, imperfection, or dilemma is the writing attempting to respond to or attempting to change? How much power does the writer have to change this exigency? Are the LL writers used to or capable of engaging with this exigency? Most U.S. writing theory has students engaging in complex social issues that are often well beyond what either native English speakers or English language learner students could solve or change. And so in your writing assignments, you probably assume a certain level of power that writers can change. Often ELL students do not come from the same expectation. They might be coming from the expectation of writing doesn't change anything. Writing simply responds to a need to report what I know. So as English language learner instructors, make sure you understand what the writing needs to change or what situation is this writing responding to. Next is called invention and topoi. And that is, how does the writer come up with good things to write about? And this is a classical rhetorical theory called invention. How do you come up with good things to say? A frequent inventional device is a commonplace, and this is the Greek word topoi. A commonplace is an issue that has social, cultural value that unites thinking, values, and typical methods of argument. If I say the word discrimination or inequality or African American, all of those terms are powerful terms in our culture that tend to generate a lot of thinking, a lot of value searching, and a lot of discussions about what is good, the ethics. You cannot rely on US-based commonplaces to have the same effect with ELL writers. They don't have that cultural background. They don't understand what discrimination means in the US context, or inequality, or Donald Trump, or Hillary Clinton. They don't have that commonplace, that common knowledge. So you need to make sure that your inventional tools are etic, and we're going to talk about etic later. Most inventional tools have students write about things that are common across humanity, and I know that's a loaded term, but for example, in all cultures we work with, there are universities. In all cultures, there are relationships and families of all types. There are relationships at jobs, at home, and in the workplace, in communities. So your inventional devices, your ways for students to come up with good things to say and to argue, need to have an etic approach, not assuming a US-based commonplace. Next, and I'll do this in 2 minutes, is kairosostasis, or what prompts or calls for writing to happen, or what rhetorical situations does writing respond to. And the example I give this is of writing in Mexico and Latin America. The rhetorical traditions in Mexico are such that writing is used not to get things on paper, to get people exploring and coming to agreements. Most of that is done orally. And writing notarizes the agreements that are often established through orality. And this is across many contexts. But in the United States, writing is often this touchstone, this tool that's used to bring people together, to come up, to construct, to deliberate, to argue, and then to use as a guide after. So when you are talking about rhetorical situations, and you can see how this goes to purpose, this goes to exigency, this goes to invention. Make sure that the students understand what writing is responding to, what it's supposed to address, what roles the writing is supposed to carry out, and what power those students have to change in this rhetorical situation. And this is a really important tool because literacy in writing has different power across different cultures. And students don't know that. Most instructors don't know that either. And they need to be explicitly taught kind of the power that writing has in U.S. culture, especially in their academic writing and in the workplace writing. Well, it looks like I've gone through issues 1 through 4, including all of those 5 issues of PRIOS. My next video will look at issues 5 through 15. We'll see if I make it that far. Thank you.